Picture this: a dimly lit room in ancient China, where the only sounds are the rustle of parchment and the soft clatter of leather puppets. A hush falls over the crowd as shadows dance across a thin silk screen, weaving tales of heroism and betrayal. But beneath the surface of these enchanting performances lies something far more daring, a coded language of rebellion. For centuries, shadow puppetry wasn't just art. It was a lifeline for voices silenced by oppression, a way to speak truth to power without uttering a single dangerous word. From the courts of emperors to the villages of Java, these flickering silhouettes carried messages that could topple dynasties or spark hope in the hearts of the oppressed. How did something so delicate become so powerful? The answer lies in the genius of the puppeteers' storytellers who mastered the art of hiding in plain sight. Imagine crafting a tale about a greedy dragon hoarding treasure, knowing full well your audience would see the corrupt official lurking behind the metaphor. Or staging a play where the clever monkey outwits the mighty tiger, a not-so-subtle nod to the people's defiance against tyranny. These performances were more than entertainment. They were acts of courage. Rulers, caught between admiration for the art and fear of its influence, often walked a tightrope, patronizing puppeteers one day and banning their plays the next. The very shadows that delighted crowds also kept kings awake at night. What makes these hidden messages so extraordinary is how they traveled, unnoticed by those in power, yet crystal clear to those who needed to hear them. A peasant might leave a performance with a spark of resistance, while the local magistrate saw nothing but a folktale. This duality made shadow puppetry the perfect weapon, invisible to the oppressor, unforgettable to the oppressed. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on this ancient tradition, uncovering the secret codes and daring symbolism that turned puppets into prophets. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at a shadow play the same way again. Because sometimes the quietest voices echoing through leather and light are the ones that change the world. The story begins in the 2nd century before the Common Era, in the court of Emperor Wu of Han, a ruler so heartbroken by the death of his favorite concubine that he banned music and laughter from the palace. Desperate to ease his sorrow, a cunning shaman crafted the first shadow play, using an oil lamp, a silk screen, and a carved leather figure to conjure the illusion of the emperor's lost love. That fleeting silhouette, dancing in the flickering light, didn't just soothe a grieving man, it sparked an art form that would travel thousands of miles, carried by merchants and monks along the Silk Road. Within centuries, shadow puppetry took root everywhere, from the spice-scented courtyards of Java to the bustling bazaars of Ottoman Turkey, evolving with each culture it touched. In India, puppets narrated epics of gods and demons. In Persia, they became tools for Sufi mystics to teach spiritual lessons. But everywhere they went, these performances held a double meaning: outwardly innocent, inwardly charged. What made shadow plays so powerful was their ability to exist in two worlds at once. To the untrained eye, they were mere folk tales or religious parables. But to those listening closely, the dialogue crackled with hidden meaning. A story about a farmer struggling against floodwaters might really be about corrupt tax collectors. A fable of a fox tricking a wolf could mirror local power struggles. Puppeteers became masters of metaphor, using animal characters, historical allegories, and even coded gestures to comment on the world around them. And because they spoke through art, not direct criticism, rulers often tolerated what they didn't fully understand. After all, how could a simple puppet show threaten an empire? Yet in village squares and temple courtyards, audiences left with more than entertainment. They carried away quiet lessons about justice, solidarity, and resistance. The genius of this system lay in its deniability. A nobleman might laugh at a play mocking greedy officials, never realizing he was the butt of the joke. Meanwhile, a peasant watching the same performance would recognize the subtext instantly, like a secret handshake hidden in plain sight. This delicate balance gave shadow puppetry its staying power. When emperors cracked down on dissent, puppeteers could claim they were merely retelling old legends, but the leather figures in their hands, those shadows never lied. Every flick of the puppeteer's wrist carried a hidden language, where even the slightest curve of a silhouette could scream rebellion. Take the exaggerated, hooked noses of corrupt officials in Chinese plays, carved just a little too sharp, so audiences would instantly recognize the greedy tax collector lurking behind the leather. Or consider the way Javanese puppeteers twisted the demon king Ravana's face into a grotesque caricature, his bulging eyes and fanged grin mirroring the Dutch colonizers who drained their land. These weren't accidental choices, they were deliberate acts of defiance etched into the very design of the puppets themselves. In Thailand's Nang Yai tradition, animals became mouthpieces for human folly. A sly fox might wear the robes of a clumsy aristocrat, while a bumbling buffalo played the part of a blundering general. The message was clear enough to those watching, but subtle enough to slip past the ears of power. Even the materials spoke volumes. Some puppeteers used translucent leather for heroic figures, letting light shine through them like virtue, while villains were cut from thicker hide, casting darker, more oppressive shadows. The craftsmanship was so precise that a single tilt of a puppet's crown could signal a ruler's incompetence, or a frayed hem might hint at a dynasty unraveling. But the real brilliance lay in how these symbols traveled across borders, adapting to local struggles while keeping their revolutionary core. In Ottoman Turkey, shadow plays featured the iconic character Karagöz, a quick-witted commoner whose chaotic antics exposed the hypocrisy of judges and clerics. His tattered cloak and unruly beard weren't just for laughs, they embodied the resilience of the working class. Meanwhile, in India, the demon Mahishasura's elaborate headdress wasn't merely decorative, it echoed the ornate crowns of invading sultans, turning mythology into a mirror for contemporary resistance. The puppeteer's greatest weapon was ambiguity. A play about a farmer battling locusts could be read as a simple folktale, or a thinly veiled jab at landlords squeezing peasants dry. This duality let the art survive even the strictest censorship. When authorities demanded changes, puppeteers could swap a villain's costume or tweak a line of dialogue, leaving the subtext intact for those who knew how to listen. Because in the end, the shadows never betrayed their secrets. They simply waited, patient as moonlight, for the right eyes to see the truth woven into their silhouettes. Authorities may have held the pens that wrote the laws, but puppeteers held the knives that carved truth into leather, and no amount of censorship could dull their blades. The Ming dynasty's edicts against seditious performances or Dutch colonial officers burning Javanese puppet chests weren't just attempts to control art, they were admissions of fear. Because when a clown god like Sema, with his potbelly and goofy grin, could reduce a king to laughter, and then, in the next breath, expose his hypocrisy, those in power recognized a threat more dangerous than swords. Take Sema Embangun Kayangan, where the so-called fool dispensed wisdom wrapped in absurdity, advising rulers to plant rice in the dry season or build houses without foundations. Dutch officials, sensing the satire beneath the silliness, banned it outright. But here's what they didn't anticipate. Prohibition turned shadow plays into forbidden fruit, and audiences grew hungrier for their hidden meanings. The crackdowns backfired spectacularly. Band performances migrated from public squares to back rooms, from daylight to midnight, with lookouts posted to whistle at the first sign of soldiers. Puppeteers became masters of disguise, embedding subversion into stories so old, censors couldn't accuse them of inventing dissent. A tale about a drought might really lament rising taxes. A fable of a stolen moon could mirror land grabs by colonial powers. The artist's greatest trick, using the censor's own tools against them. When authorities demanded scripts be submitted for approval, puppeteers handed over sanitized versions, then improvised the dangerous lines live, leaving no paper trail. The shadows, after all, were fleeting. By the time officials realized they'd been duped, the puppets had already spoken their piece. This cat and mouse game birthed astonishing creativity. In China, during the Qing dynasty's literary purges, puppeteers adapted Journey to the West, but with the rebellious Monkey King's antics suddenly mirroring local corrupt officials. In Java, seasonal harvest festivals became cover for critiquing Dutch land policies, with the villainous ogre Buta Kakel recast as a stammering, red-faced colonial officer. Even the puppet's designs evolved to outwit censors. A nobleman's robe might be stitched with patterns resembling shackles, or a demon's face carved to resemble a notorious tax collector, details subtle enough to evade notice but unmistakable to a knowing audience. Persecution didn't silence the shadows, it amplified them. Every ban became free publicity, every arrested puppeteer a martyr, and when officials raided performances, they often found nothing but innocent folktales because the real message had already slipped into the crowd, carried home in whispers and winks. The Dutch could burn 1,000 puppets, but they couldn't unsee what audiences had already witnessed. That power, no matter how brute, could be mocked, unraveled, and outwitted by leather and light. The censor's greatest failure was proving the puppeteer's point, that when art speaks in shadows, even the brightest torches of authority can't illuminate its secrets. While warlords and emperors obsessed over controlling the narrative, women puppeteers were quietly rewriting the script, one silhouette at a time. In the mountain villages of Sichuan, where Confucian tradition dictated a woman's place was silent and unseen, female storytellers found their voice behind the screen. They carved leather heroines who didn't just weep over lost loves, they outsmarted bandits, negotiated with dragons, and even tricked the gods themselves. Take the tale of Lady Zhorong, a fiery noblewoman who appears in regional puppet plays. While the official histories paint her as a dutiful wife, shadow versions show her leading armies and inventing gunpowder. The message was clear: if a leather cutout could defy expectations, so could the women watching. Bali's Dalang priestesses took this further, weaving subversion into sacred performances. During temple ceremonies, they'd slip modern critiques into ancient Hindu epics. A scene from the Mahabharata might suddenly feature the warrior Princess Draupadi schooling arrogant kings on justice, an unthinkable twist in male-led retellings. Even the medium broke rules. While men voiced female characters in most Asian traditions, Balinese women puppeteers spoke their own lines, their voices rising unbidden from behind the screen. For audiences, the effect was electric. Watching a goddess puppet wield a sword while a real woman's laughter echoed through the courtyard blurred the line between myth and reality. Then there's Hua Mulan, not the sanitized Disney version, but the shadow play heroine who became a lifeline for women under Mongol rule. In 13th century Chinese villages, puppeteers staged a story with deliberate tweaks. Her armor was bulkier, her sword strokes fiercer, and her final homecoming didn't end with marriage. It showed her teaching village girls archery. Every choice carried weight. When Mongol officials attended these performances, they saw a harmless folktale. But for women grinding millet in the back rows, it was a blueprint. If Mulan could vanish into a soldier's identity, perhaps they too could hide strength in plain sight. The most daring act of all, becoming the puppeteer. In Korea's Namsadang troops, officially all male troops, women sometimes disguised themselves as boys to perform. Swathed in loose robes and lowering their voices, they manipulated puppets by day and slipped back into traditional roles by night. But in those fleeting hours behind the screen, they controlled every movement, every line, every laugh. The subtext was unmistakable. If society insisted women were shadows, they'd use shadows to reshape society. What makes these stories revolutionary isn't just their content, but their context. Unlike written manifestos or open protests, dangerous and easily destroyed shadow plays were ephemeral. A performance ended, the screen folded away, leaving no evidence but the afterimage burning in spectators' minds. Authorities couldn't arrest a metaphor. They couldn't confiscate the way a grandmother's grip tightened on her granddaughter's hand when a puppet queen declared, "A ruler's worth is measured by their people's courage, not their own." The real magic wasn't in the leather or the lamp. It was in the space between light and shadow, where for one stolen moment, the impossible felt inevitable. In feudal Japan, where cherry blossoms hid castle intrigues, shadow puppeteers walked a razor's edge. Entertainers by day, spies by moonlight, shoguns hired troops to perform for samurai, unaware the same artists were counting guard rotations or noting which lords drank too deeply during allegories about loyalty. The puppeteer's genius, their invisibility. Who would suspect the hunched old man tuning his shamisen was memorizing the layout of a fortress, or that the comic tale of a bumbling badger was really a signal to rebel sympathizers in the crowd? Even the puppets themselves became tools of espionage. Delicate carvings of demons hid maps in their hollow bellies, while the rhythmic clacking of sticks could mimic coded messages. Vietnam's water puppetry took this duality to daring heights during the TR-1ECB-NHNG-UY-1EC5N wars. Staged in flooded rice paddies, performances about mythical carp leaping upstream concealed urgent warnings. The number of puppets emerging from the bamboo curtain might indicate approaching enemy battalions, while a puppet fisherman's tangled net could symbolize an ambush point. Villagers would nod along to the music, absorbing tactical details disguised as nursery rhymes. The water itself became an ally, swallowing incriminating evidence the moment the show ended. What made puppeteers perfect agents wasn't just their mobility, but their unassuming nature. In an era where messengers were searched and border guards scrutinized travelers, a troop hauling wooden chests of children's toys faced little suspicion. Korean Keokjugaksi puppeteers smuggling rebel letters sewn into costumes, Thai Nang Talong troops hiding maps in the intricate perforations of leather puppets. The very art form that made them conspicuous also rendered them invisible, because who imagines revolution brewing behind a clown's painted grin? Rulers played both sides, employing puppeteers as propagandists while fearing their influence. The Tokugawa shogunate commissioned plays glorifying feudal loyalty, only to panic when audiences cheered scenes of clever peasants outwitting tax collectors. In Ayutthaya, Siamese kings used shadow plays to spread Buddhist edicts, then burned entire troops when their Rama epic subtly critiqued royal excess. This paradox defined puppeteers. They were simultaneously court darlings and fugitives, their art celebrated until the moment it became too potent to control. The ultimate irony: some of history's most explosive rebellions began not with swords, but with backstage whispers between performances. When Vietnamese puppeteers staged the tale of the magic crossbow, villagers didn't just see a legend, they saw instructions for building weapons. And when a Japanese troop's accidental fire destroyed a warlord's storehouse during a performance, The real spark had come weeks earlier, hidden in the dialogue of a puppet fox's riddle. Long before modern spycraft invented dead drops and ciphers, shadow players perfected the art of rebellion, one flickering silhouette at a time. Religion didn't just inspire shadow puppetry, it gave the art its fangs. In Thailand's moonlit temple courtyards, Buddhist monks staged jatakas, the Buddha's past life tales with a twist, the story of Prince Vesantara, who gave away his wealth until he had nothing left, wasn't just a lesson in generosity. It was a scalding commentary on corrupt tax collectors bleeding villagers dry. Every time the noble prince handed another jewel to a beggar, audiences saw their own rulers clutching coin purses tighter. Monks, shielded by their robes, could say what peasants couldn't. That greed wasn't just a sin, it was policy. Across the Malay Peninsula, Islamic Wayang Kulit troops turned the Prophet's parables into protest. The tale of Solomon and the ants, where the king bows to avoid crushing tiny creatures, became a pointed reminder that even sultans should kneel before their people. Puppeteers dressed courtly excess in holy garb. A scene of Karan's golden palace sinking into the earth wasn't just scripture. It was a warning to local elites building mansions on stolen land. The genius lay in the delivery. These weren't rebel shouts, but whispers woven into prayer. A villager could nod along to the moral while silently tallying their landlord's sins. Nowhere was this celestial critique sharper than in Tibet. Exiled troops performing the Yama's judgment play, a Buddhist allegory of the Hell King punishing sinners, carved their tormentor's face with unmistakable modern features. As Yama's shadow loomed over trembling puppet souls, audiences didn't see a mythical demon. They saw the stern visage of a communist official. The play's climax, where enlightened beings intervened to spare repentant souls, wasn't just theology, it was resistance disguised as redemption. Sacred stories became subversive because they spoke two languages at once. To the devout, they affirmed tradition. To the desperate, they revealed a celestial blueprint for earthly justice. When a Thai farmer watched a leather deity strike down a demon king, he wasn't just seeing karma, he was imagining his landlord's downfall. And when a Malaysian mother whispered the moral to her children, she wasn't just teaching piety, she was planting seeds of dissent in the guise of bedtime stories. The most dangerous part, authorities couldn't scrub these messages away without blaspheming. Ban a jataka and you risked angering monks. Censor a Quranic parable and you insulted the faithful. So the plays continued, their divine scripts sheltering human grievances. After all, if heaven itself condemned oppression, who were earthly rulers to disagree? The puppeteer's real miracle wasn't making leather move, it was making scripture speak in the present tense, turning ancient parables into living manifestos. What made these performances unforgettable was their dual power. They comforted the pious while arming the oppressed. A single play could send a grandmother home clutching her prayer beads and a young rebel tightening his fist, both hearing the same words, both finding different strength in the shadows. That was the art's sacred contradiction. It could bless and burn in the same breath, weaving dissent into devotion until even the gods seemed to nod along. Colonial powers never stood a chance against the leather and light rebellion. In the Dutch East Indies, where officials banned native languages in schools, puppet masters struck back with performances so coded, they became a crash course in resistance. The Dalang screen became a classroom. Heroes from the Mahabharata like Arjuna and Bhima suddenly spoke in Javanese proverbs about unity, while the ogre Butakakil sprouted a comically large colonial hat and mangled local dialects. Audiences howled with laughter, but the lesson was deadly serious. Our stories will outlive your rule. Burmese puppeteers played an even riskier game during British occupation. Staging the Ramayana was permitted until censors realized the monkey army's chants to free Sita mirrored anti-colonial slogans. A single line about breaking golden chains could land a troop in prison, so artists developed a shadow language. Puppets tugged their ears, a Burmese gesture of disrespect when British officers entered, or the villain Ravana's 10 heads would mysteriously resemble top hats. The real masterstroke, using the colonizers' own tools against them. When officials demanded English translations of scripts, puppeteers submitted sanitized versions, then unleashed the real dialogue in performance, trusting illiterate villagers to memorize subversive lines before authorities could react. Vietnam's water puppetry turned occupation into farce. French officials initially adored the quaint shows where wooden fish danced in flooded courtyards until they noticed the fishermen puppets wore exaggerated mustaches and complained about stolen rice. By the time colonial officers recognized themselves in the bumbling characters, the metaphors had already soaked into public consciousness. The backlash was swift. Saigon banned performances in 1923, but the troops simply moved to riverbanks where guards couldn't confiscate puppets that sank into the mud at the first sign of trouble. What made these acts of defiance so effective was their deniability. A Dutch governor might applaud a Wayang performance, oblivious that the clown servant Semmer's fart jokes contained precise counts of tax collections. British officers chuckled at Burmese puppet elephants, missing how their elaborate howdahs mirrored the opulence of colonial mansions. The French never connected Vietnam's puppet frogs croaking about jumping too high to peasant uprisings. Because colonial arrogance assumed folk art was harmless, it failed to see the shadows sharpening into knives. The ultimate triumph: when empires fell, the puppets remained. Indonesia's proclamation of independence in 1945 featured Wayang characters on propaganda posters. Burma's first post-colonial leaders borrowed puppet theater's symbolic colors for their new flag. And in Hanoi, water puppetry returned to public squares, this time with French caricatures replaced by heroes holding rice stalks and books. The colonizers had mistaken silence for submission, not realizing the stories whispered behind screens were time bombs wrapped in leather, waiting to explode into history. Creatures of leather and light became the ultimate political commentators, no fangs or claws needed. In Korean Keikokdu Gaksi performances, that sly fox wasn't just a forest trickster. Its exaggerated whiskers twitched with the same smugness as the Confucian scholars who took bribes behind scrolls of poetry. Audiences howled when the puppet fox recited pompous verses while stuffing coins into its sleeves, a direct jab at officials who preached ethics but practiced greed. The genius: by draping corruption in fur, puppeteers made it absurd enough to laugh at, yet recognizable enough to sting. Over in Bali, the Garuda, a majestic mythical bird, took on a heartbreaking duality. Traditionally a symbol of divine power, its wings clipped during Dutch rule became a silent scream for independence. Puppeteers carved its feathers extra rigid, so when the bird struggled against invisible chains, the shadow stretched like a map of the archipelago itself. Villagers didn't need subtitles to understand. This was their story, told through the trembling silhouette of a creature too mighty to cage. But perhaps the most revolutionary animal of all was China's unassuming frog. In drought-stricken regions, puppeteers staged battles where swarms of these amphibians swallowed a bloated, silk-robed toad representing landlords. The lesson wasn't subtle. Alone, a frog was harmless. United, they could devour oppression. Farmers watching these plays began organizing irrigation cooperatives, using the frog as their secret emblem, proof that metaphors could leap off the screen into reality. What gave these animal allegories such teeth was their flexibility. A tiger king might symbolize a tyrant in one era, then transform into a foreign invader the next. In Japanese plays, the tanuki, a shape-shifting raccoon dog, mocked samurai who changed loyalties with the seasons, its belly drumming a rhythmic critique of hypocrisy. Even the puppet's movements carried coded meaning. A fox's exaggerated bow could mirror the groveling of sycophantic courtiers, while a buffalo's slow blink might signal the patient defiance of laborers. The true power lay in the animal's innocence. Authorities might punish a playwright for insulting a magistrate, but how could they arrest a fable about a mischievous monkey? This deniability let shadow troops survive where outright dissent would have been crushed. When a Javanese prince banned stories about greedy wolves, puppeteers simply swapped them for crocodiles, keeping the same sharp-toothed critique under new scales. The stories adapted, but the rebellion beneath the fur and feathers never faded. For audiences, these creatures became avatars of their own struggles. A peasant might see himself in the frog's resilience, or a merchant's wife recognize her wit in the fox's schemes. And when the leather Garuda finally broke its chains in a Balinese climax, the cheers weren't just for a puppet. They were for every viewer who dared to imagine their own wings unfolding. Because in the end, the most dangerous animals weren't the ones on screen. They were the people watching, learning to roar. Music wasn't just the backdrop to shadow plays, it was the invisible ink that made hidden messages dance through the air. In the royal courts of Java, where Dutch colonizers strained to decode the intricate movements of Wayang puppets, they missed the real cipher, the gamelan orchestra's shifting rhythms. A sudden acceleration in the kendang drum's beat might signal an upcoming rice tax protest, while the metallophone's dissonant tones could mark safe houses for rebel fighters. To the untrained ear, it sounded like tradition. To those who knew the code, it was a ticking clock counting down to revolution. Chinese puppeteers took this sonic espionage further, weaving secret society signals into operatic accompaniments. A specific sequence of gong strikes during a scene about mythical lovers wasn't just drama. It was a summons for the White Lotus Society to gather under moonlight. The most dangerous messages traveled through flute melodies, where the pitch of a single sustained note could indicate which magistrate's mansion was targeted for sabotage. Authorities patrolled the streets for whispered conspiracies, never realizing the rebellion was broadcasting openly in the music of village festivals. The brilliance of these auditory codes lay in their impermanence. Unlike printed pamphlets or carved symbols, sound left no evidence once the performance ended. A Javanese puppeteer could deny accusations of sedition by claiming a drum rhythm was simply how his grandfather taught him. Chinese opera singers, when interrogated, would insist their soaring vibrato was just artistic flourish. By the time officials realized these musical accidents followed suspicious patterns, the intelligence had already been absorbed by crowds dispersing into the night. Even the silences spoke volumes. In Thai Nang Yai Theatre, the abrupt cessation of pifat ensemble music during a battle scene wasn't an error, it marked the exact moment when audience members should check beneath their seats for hidden resistance leaflets. Burmese puppeteers used pauses between zither notes to coordinate the smuggling of weapons, with each rest symbolizing a different checkpoint to avoid. The colonizers, busy confiscating suspicious puppets, never thought to ban the spaces between the sounds. What made this sonic rebellion unstoppable was its adaptability. When Dutch officials in Java mandated slower tempos to prevent agitation, puppeteers simply layered codes into the resonating overtones of gongs, frequencies European ears couldn't discern. In Vietnam, water puppet troops facing French censorship turned bamboo clappers into binary transmitters, using quick successive clicks to relay troop movements under the guise of mimicking frog calls. The colonizers, convinced they controlled the narrative, didn't notice the real conversation happening in the gaps between their understanding. for modern audiences, these musical secrets still echo. The same Javanese gamelan rhythm that once signaled a rebel attack now features in Indonesian Independence Day celebrations, a national inside joke. And in southern China, elderly puppeteers can still perform the forbidden White Lotus melody from memory, though today it's just a bittersweet relic. But the lesson remains: when you want to hide a message, sometimes the best place isn't in shadows or symbols, but in plain hearing. Festivals weren't just celebrations, they were revolutions waiting to happen. Under the cover of firecrackers and floating lanterns, puppeteers turned Lunar New Year and harvest festivals into stages for rebellion. Take Thailand's Loy Krathong, where thousands gathered to release candlelit floats onto rivers. Amid the glittering spectacle, shadow plays told of greedy kings drowning in those very waters, a not-so-subtle nod to local officials who'd mysteriously vanished after crossing the wrong villages. The audience's cheers weren't just for the drama, they were rehearsals for justice. In China's Yongzhou, the 1848 puppet festival coincided with a salt smugglers' uprising, no accident. As authorities scrambled to contain riots, troops staged plays about heroic bandits who stole from the rich to feed the poor. The timing was exquisite, with streets packed and guards distracted. Rebel messages spread like wildfire. A puppet's flourish could signal the start of a riot. A particular drumbeat might mark which granary to raid. The chaos of celebration became the perfect camouflage for chaos of another kind. What made these festival uprisings so effective was their built-in alibi. How could officials ban a centuries-old harvest ritual without provoking outrage? By the time rulers realized the plays had double meanings, the damage was done. In Java, Wayang performances during Ramadan blended Quranic verses with calls for land reform, leaving Dutch colonists torn between respecting religious tradition and silencing dissent. The result: they often chose wrong, cracking down on puppeteers only to ignite wider unrest. The real magic lay in the festival's ephemeral nature. Like the floating Krathong lanterns themselves, the subversive moments flickered brightly, then vanished before they could be pinned down. A play mocking taxes might end with the puppeteer bowing to applause, his dangerous words already dissolving into the night air. By morning, all that remained were whispers and the lingering sense that something had shifted. Festivals gave people permission to gather, to cheer, to imagine. And in that space between celebration and rebellion, empires could tremble. Consider the Burmese Thadingyut festival, where puppet troops reenacted the Buddha's descent from heaven with a twist. The celestial light illuminating his path somehow always shone brightest on scenes of corrupt ministers stumbling in the dark. British colonizers, wary of offending religious sensibilities, gritted their teeth through performances they knew were mocking them. Because that was the puppeteer's ultimate weapon, wrapping defiance in tradition so tight even the oppressors had to applaud. These weren't just stories told during festivals, they were festivals because of the stories. Villagers tolerated back-breaking taxes all year, knowing harvest season would bring a chance to see their grievances carved into leather and set aflame with laughter. When a Javanese Dalang puppeteer made a clown character mimic the Dutch governor's stiff walk, the crowd's roar wasn't just catharsis, it was a promise. Next year, the puppets might say more. Next year, the shadows might grow teeth. A spinning wheel wasn't just scenery, it was a revolution in motion. In the hands of a skilled puppeteer, that whirling disc became the relentless cycle of taxes grinding peasants down, each turn mirroring another season of hunger. A broken bridge didn't merely set the stage for a hero's journey. Its splintered planks whispered of crumbling dynasties too arrogant to repair their foundations. Every prop in Shadow Theatre carried this double weight, innocuous to censors, incendiary to those who knew the code. Take the shattered sword in Cambodia's Esbektom tradition. When the noble warrior's blade snapped mid-duel, audiences didn't gasp at the dramatic twist. They recognized the omen. That splintered weapon mirrored the real king's weakening grip on power, its fracture predicting his downfall months before rebels stormed the palace. The genius lay in plausible deniability. Officials saw a broken prop while villagers saw prophecy carved in leather. Even colors became conspirators. Chinese puppeteers draped heroes in revolutionary red long before it adorned flags. The dye boiled from smuggled safflower, as bold as the messages it carried. Burmese artists stitched mourning white into every puppet's hem during British rule, not just for the dead, but for a nation bleeding under occupation. These weren't aesthetic choices, they were chromatic battle cries. The most dangerous props were those that transformed mid-performance. A Javanese dalang might flip a rice basket upside down during a harvest scene, instantly turning abundance into famine, and famine into accusation. In Tai Nang Talung, a merchant's scale would mysteriously tip further with each bribe, the imbalance growing so grotesque even children understood the metaphor. Objects didn't just speak under censorship, they shouted in a language only the oppressed could fully hear. What gave these props such power was their universality. A spinning wheel meant something specific to a silk weaver in Suzhou and a rice farmer in Ayutthaya, yet both could read its political subtext. When a Vietnamese water puppet's fishing net came up empty 3 times in a row, fishermen didn't need dialogue to recognize the commentary on French export quotas. The props became Rosetta Stones of resistance, translating local grievances into a shared visual language that crossed borders and dialects. Authorities often missed the symbolism because they looked for words, not gestures. They'd confiscate scripts searching for sedition, oblivious to the treason woven into a puppet's embroidered sash or the way a shadow gatekeeper's keys jingled like coin-filled tax coffers. By the time rulers realized objects could be weapons, the damage was done. Peasants were already sharpening real sickles to the rhythm of symbolic ones clattering onstage. The true artistry wasn't in hiding messages, it was in making them so visible, so ordinary, that only those ready to see would understand. The fool's grin was the perfect disguise, wide enough to hide a dagger behind. Across Asia, court jesters escaped punishment for their barbs by playing the idiot, but Shadow Puppetry's clowns took this ancient trick and weaponized it. Java's Sema, with his potbelly and goofy walk, could reduce a king to stitches while whispering treason through his puppet's gap-toothed smile, his genius. Making oppression ridiculous, a scene where he accidentally sat on a tax collector's ledger wasn't just physical comedy, it was a masterclass in turning tyranny into a laughingstock. Turkey's Karagöz perfected the art of chaotic truth-telling. With his tattered turban and braying laugh, this everyman puppet tripped over aristocratic pretensions like loose cobblestones. When he mocked a judge's absurd verdict by pretending to misunderstand the law, so if I steal a chicken but say it flew into my pot, that's justice. The audience's roar wasn't just amusement, it was recognition. The Ottoman elite tolerated his antics because dismissing him as a fool saved face, but the leather slapping against the screen might as well have been the sound of their authority cracking. China's Chu clown operated even closer to the knife's edge. Behind the white painted nose and wobbly gait, this stock character delivered lines that would have meant execution if spoken plainly. A routine about counting grains of rice became a viral critique of corrupt census takers inflating numbers to demand more taxes. The Chu's exaggerated confusion. Why does one bowl suddenly feed 20 families? Let villagers laugh at their own helplessness while secretly tallying their grievances. What made these fools so lethal was their cultural immunity. In Java, Sema's divine origins as a fallen god gave him sacred protection. Criticizing him was blasphemy. Turkish shadow masters claimed Karagöz's spirit would haunt anyone who silenced him. And in China, the Chu's roots in ancient shamanic rituals meant even emperors hesitated to ban what ancestors had blessed. The clowns hid behind layers of tradition, their leather faces armor against retaliation. Their true power, though, lay in turning laughter into a weapon. When Sema farted in a nobleman's general direction, the joke wasn't just scatological, it reduced privilege to a bad smell. Karagöz's stupid questions exposed the illogic of oppressive laws, and the Chu's drunken stumbles mirrored a system too crooked to walk straight. By the time rulers realized the jokes were on them, the crowd had already memorized the punchlines and the lessons they carried. The fool's final trick, making sure the last laugh always belonged to the people. Korean puppeteers didn't just entertain Ming emperors, they schooled them in statecraft without saying a word. When diplomatic missions arrived bearing ornate chests of leather figures, the shows they performed were masterclasses in velvet-gloved persuasion. A play about a mythical dragon king who listened to his people's woes wasn't just flattery, it was a mirror held up to the throne, reflecting Confucian ideals the emperor couldn't publicly ignore. Every bow of the puppet ruler, every scene of benevolent judgment carried an unspoken contract. This is how history will remember you. The genius, wrapping advice in allegory, made it impossible to refuse. An emperor might punish a blunt advisor, but banning a puppet show praising wise governance would make him look paranoid, or worse, guilty. Ryukyu's envoys took this further, turning puppetry into geopolitical chess. Their troops performed for Japan's shoguns, threading delicate myths about island spirits negotiating with mountain gods. To the untrained eye, it was folklore. To the shogunate, it was a coded plea. Let our kingdom remain a neutral trading hub, and we'll keep supplying silk and sappanwood. The puppets' flowing sleeves mimicked Ryukyu's famed textiles. Their oceanic backdrops highlighted the kingdom's strategic waters. Even the music carried weight, slower tempos during scenes of divine harmony, subtly urging patience in diplomatic talks. When the shogun's advisors later debated Ryukyu's status, those lingering images of cooperative deities swayed decisions more than any ambassador's memorandum. What made these performances unstoppable was their plausible deniability. A Ming official couldn't accuse Koreans of insolence when their puppets praised his emperor's heavenly wisdom. A Tokugawa shogun would look foolish punishing Ryukyu troops for misinterpreting myths his own scholars had approved. The puppeteer's safety lay in their art's fluidity. A single tilt of a puppet's head could shift a scene from tribute to critique, then back again before authorities caught on. The real power, though, lay in the shadows themselves. Unlike stone monuments or written treaties, these diplomatic messages were etched in light, here for one dazzling moment, then gone, leaving only afterimages in the minds of rulers. A shogun might forget an envoy's words, but the silhouette of a puppet dragon sharing treasure with lesser creatures, that stuck. Centuries before modern soft power, these troops proved a truth still relevant today. Sometimes the mightiest negotiations happen not in throne rooms, but in the flickering space between lamp and screen. When leather puppets burned, the stories didn't die, they migrated to flesh and bone. In the jungles of Kelantan, Malay puppeteers turned their own skin into living scrolls, tattooing entire epics between shoulder blades and along ribs. A swirling motif near the collarbone might encode a forbidden scene where the clown servant Sema outsmarts a demon king. A vine-like pattern down the arm could hide verses about lost kingdoms. These weren't decorations, they were blueprints for rebellion, etched where colonial officers wouldn't think to look. The tattoos served a brutal calculus. Even if authorities destroyed every puppet and script, the stories could still be read by fingertips tracing raised ink in the dark. by apprentices memorizing the maps on their masters' backs. Decades later, during Mao's China, village elders performed a different kind of skin-bound preservation. When Red Guards stormed temples to smash feudal shadow puppets, the old storytellers retreated inward. A grandfather bouncing his grandson on his knee might seem to be reciting nursery rhymes, but the child would later realize those sing-song cadences held the entire romance of the three kingdoms in coded couplets. A widow weaving baskets by the river could stitch the plot of a band play into her repetitive motions, each twist of bamboo echoing a puppet's entrance. The body's rhythms, heartbeats, breaths, the swing of a hoe became mnemonic devices. This organic resistance reached its peak during the Cultural Revolution's chaos. When surveillance networks fractured in 1971, shadow plays erupted like wildflowers through cracks in the pavement. A farmer's sudden impersonation of a greedy landlord during harvest wasn't just comic relief, it was a decade of pent-up performance bursting forth. Teenagers who'd never seen a real puppet show discovered they already knew the stories by muscle memory, their hands moving through familiar gestures as if pulling invisible strings. The tales had survived not despite their suppression, but because of it forced into bodies where they grew stronger, like seeds scattered by a storm. What makes these living archives so extraordinary is their impermanence. A tattoo fades, a voice falters, yet each time the stories transferred, from skin to memory, from elder to child, they gained new layers. A Javanese folktale about a buffalo outwitting a tiger might acquire fresh resonance when whispered by a labor camp prisoner. The same scene tattooed on a puppeteer's chest in 1942 could inspire a different rebellion when read by his granddaughter in 1968. Unlike static parchment, these corporeal texts evolved with every retelling, their meanings shifting like shadows at dusk. The ultimate irony. While emperors built libraries to immortalize their glory, the oppressed turned their very sinews into repositories of truth. A dynasty's archives could burn in a single night, but the story humming in a weaver's throat or inked onto a fisherman's ribs, that required the erasure of an entire people. And as history shows, some shadows refuse to be extinguished. They simply wait for the light to change. Martial shadows didn't just recount battles. They were arsenals of memory, where every flick of a puppet's sword carved history into the collective consciousness. In feudal Japan, Keiji masters staged midnight performances of the Shimabara Rebellion, their paper-thin samurai clashing in shadows that danced like the real uprising's dying embers. The puppeteer's hands moved with the precision of swordsmen, each parry and thrust mirroring the rebel Amakusa Shiro's doomed last stand. To shogunate spies, it was entertainment. To farmers in the crowd, it was a reminder the shogun's grip could be shaken. Vietnam's water puppetry turned aquatic stages into war museums. The Trung sisters, legendary warriors who led the first uprising against Chinese rule in 40 AD, didn't just appear in these plays, they lived anew. Bamboo rods made their wooden horses charge through knee-deep water, spears glinting with each ripple. But the real genius was in the staging. When the sisters' army drowned Han Dynasty troops by submerging puppets, audiences didn't just see ancient history. They saw their own guerrilla tactics against later invaders reflected in the water's shimmer. Burmese yoke Thay puppets took rebellion further, embedding martial arts into their very joints. A single warrior figure could execute all 37 moves of bando, the forbidden fighting style British colonizers had banned. Parents brought children not just to watch, but to memorize every spin kick and elbow strike preserved in leather and lacquer. The puppets didn't just tell stories of resistance, they became training manuals for future rebels. What made these warrior puppets so potent was their ability to rewrite defeat as prophecy. A Japanese cage show might end with rebel samurai falling, but the final image, their shadows merging into Mount Hoki's silhouette, hinted at spirits still watching over the land. Vietnamese water puppeteers staged the Trung sisters' suicide by drowning as a transcendent act, their wooden forms sinking only to reappear as ripples lapping at the audience's feet. Even in death, these puppets refused to stay buried. The ultimate rebellion lay in the puppeteers' anonymity. Unlike painted scrolls or carved monuments, which bore their creators' names and could be traced, shadow warriors left no signature but the story itself. A Burmese puppeteer arrested for sedition in 1889 famously told his interrogators, "The hands that move these puppets belong to the people." And in that truth lay the art's terrifying power. You could jail the artist, but the shadows they'd unleashed kept fighting without them. Even the smallest props could carry the weight of rebellion. In Chinese shadow plays during the Qing dynasty's worst famines, puppeteers crafted rice sacks with exaggerated bulges, each stitch a silent indictment of merchants hoarding grain while children starved. The sack shadows loomed larger than life on the screen, their swollen curves mirroring the bellies of profiteers feasting behind closed doors. Audiences needed no subtitles to understand. When the puppet merchant clutched his fake grain and moaned about market shortages, the laughter that followed was laced with rage. Over in Bali, Dutch colonizers became unwitting stars of their own satire. Puppeteers carved leather caricatures of plantation owners with comically long noses, sniffing piles of nutmeg and cloves, their shadows stretching like greedy fingers across the screen. The punchline: these puppet monopolists spoke in garbled Dutch Balinese hybrids, their demands for meer, more, twisting colonial avarice into absurdity. What made these jabs so devastating was their accuracy. The same merchants who applauded the quaint native art at dinner parties often failed to recognize themselves in the grotesque silhouettes. But the boldest economic critiques came from the puppeteers' own pockets. A Javanese dalang might freeze a climactic battle scene to pass a wooden bowl through the crowd, his voice dripping with false deference. "Forgive the interruption, noble guests, just practicing how quickly we can collect coins like the Sultan's taxmen." The clink of each coin was a mic drop, laying bare the cruelty of extraction under the guise of humor. These weren't mere donations, they were acts of solidarity. The audience's spare change transformed into a communal middle finger to oppression. The real genius of these economic protests was their surgical precision. A Thai Nang Yai puppeteer could skewer corrupt officials by having a puppet elephant symbolizing the monarchy accidentally crush a tiny merchant figure, only for the handler to shrug. Oops, the big ones never watch where they step. In Vietnam, water puppets of fishermen hauling empty nets became viral metaphors for French export quotas draining local livelihoods. Every prop, every pause, every exaggerated gesture turned the stage into a courtroom where the powerful stood trial by silhouette. What separated these performances from mere complaint was their transformative power. When Chinese villagers saw puppet landlords tripping over their own stolen gold, it didn't just validate their anger, it made injustice feel temporary, laughable, beatable. The Balinese didn't just mock Dutch greed, they reclaimed agency by reducing their oppressors to ridiculous puppets, their strings visible for all to see. And when the Dalang's donation bowl returned brimming, it proved something revolutionary. Even under tyranny, art could still feed more than just the rulers. When the Qing dynasty tightened its grip, Chinese puppeteers became masters of the artful retreat, appearing to surrender while smuggling rebellion into plain sight. A play condemning corrupt officials might suddenly conclude with the villain's redemption, bowing to a Manchu judge who dispensed Confucian wisdom. To censors, it was proof of loyalty. To audiences, the real message flickered in the details. The judge's shadow loomed unnaturally large, his praise for obedience dripping with irony only locals could taste. These approved endings weren't concessions, they were Trojan horses wrapping dissent in the emperor's own rhetoric. Across the South China Sea, Filipino performers staged an even bolder transformation under Spanish rule. The epic Hinalawad, once a celebration of pre-colonial warrior gods, suddenly gained baptismal scenes where pagan heroes knelt before crosses. Missionaries applauded, unaware the puppeteers had hidden the old gods in plain sight. Their animist symbols stitched into the saints' robes, their chants woven into Latin hymns. A statue of the Virgin Mary might cast a shadow suspiciously resembling the fertility goddess Ikapoti when the lamp tilted just so. The colonizers saw conversion, the villagers witnessed resurrection. This delicate dance of adaptation relied on 3 survival strategies, each more ingenious than the last. First came surface compliance, outward adherence to censors' demands. In Guangdong, troops performed state-mandated plays extolling King harmony, but kept the rebellious originals alive through mistakes. A puppeteer's slip of the hand might send a villain tumbling into the lamp's flame, eliciting knowing cheers for an accidental execution. Next was symbolic camouflage, like the Filipino practice of carving Christian saints with indigenous facial features, or dressing biblical magi in traditional barong cloth. The third and most daring tactic was performative sabotage. Javanese puppeteers under Dutch rule would forget crucial props for approved scripts, forcing improvised scenes where the clown Sema inevitably skewered colonial policies. The true brilliance lay in how these adaptations weaponized the colonizers' biases. Spanish friars dismissed subtle syncretism as native superstition, never grasping that the fusion was the rebellion. King officials mistook theatrical flattery as submission, oblivious to the way puppeteers used Manchu-style costumes to highlight the dynasty's foreignness. Even banned stories survived through kinetic memory. Burmese performers, stripped of their puppets during British raids, taught plots to their children through coded hand gestures, turning bedtime into resistance training. What looked like compromise was often covert preservation. When Beijing banned tales of the outlaw Song Jiang, Shandong troops simply relocated his adventures to mythical realms with suspiciously familiar corrupt officials. Filipino Carrillo puppeteers replaced crucified Christ figures with indigenous wood that produced deeper, drum-like tones when struck, a sonic reminder of pre-colonial animist rituals. The art didn't just endure oppression, it metabolized it, turning censorship into creative fuel. A Balinese puppeteer summed it up best after Dutch confiscations. They took our leather, but not the shadows in our hands. In the tea houses of Ming Dynasty Nanjing, scholars sipped tea with one hand and penned puppet scripts with the other, their brushes dancing between flattery and treason. A seemingly innocuous poem about spring blossoms might contain acrostics spelling eunuch steel grain. When read vertically, court officials would applaud the elegant calligraphy, never noticing how the strokes of certain characters curved like daggers. These literati perfected a delicate art, crafting stories so layered, a peasant could grasp the subtext while a censor saw only classical refinement. Take the infamous Orchid Pavilion puppet. Scroll outwardly a romantic fable, but rearrange certain passages, and it became a scathing indictment of the emperor's inner circle. The real brilliance, the anagrams weren't mistakes. They were Easter eggs planted where only the oppressed would think to look. Korean Yongbun aristocrats played an even riskier game. While publicly reciting Confucian odes, they privately funded troops performing Sandy Nore ribald plays where masked nobles tripped over their own robes, their blunders mirroring the dynasty's faltering rule. The scripts dripped with classical allusions so obscure, only fellow scholars caught the references to corrupt ministers. A line about the cicada's empty shell wasn't nature poetry, it mocked officials who took bribes while pretending to fast. The Yongban's greatest cover was their own reputation, who would suspect Korea's most refined minds of orchestrating shadow puppet rebellions. This elite dissent thrived in the gap between literacy and comprehension. Ming censors scanning for sedition missed how a scene about the moon's reflection in water used homophones to suggest the emperor's authority was mere illusion. Korean officials chuckled at peasant humor about drunken aristocrats, oblivious that every slurred syllable parodied royal edicts. The puppet screen became the perfect filter, its shadows sharp enough to cut, yet soft enough to deny. When a Beijing censor finally deciphered a scholar's anagram in 1623, the puppeteer simply smiled. Art mirrors life's accidents. By morning, 3 different versions of the script circulated, each more innocuous than the last. What made these highbrow rebellions unstoppable was their cultural armor. Banning a literati's play meant accusing the educated elite of treason, a political minefield. Punishing Yongban puppeteers risked turning aristocratic satire into martyrdom. So the shows continued, their silk screens fluttering like the scholars' sleeves, hiding trembling hands that weren't shaking from fear, but from the quiet thrill of outwitting tyranny with ink and lamplight. The ruler's fatal mistake was underestimating how dangerous a refined mind could be when it chose to whisper rather than shout. Children's bedtime stories were never just stories, they were boot camps for rebellion disguised as nursery rhymes. In the bamboo-lined courtyards of colonial Burma, wide-eyed kids gathered around flickering screens where puppet mice darted between the claws of a towering cat. The villain's accent, a perfect mimicry of British officers hunting dissidents. Every squeaky victory cheer from those leather rodents wasn't just entertainment, it was muscle memory for outwitting oppressors. Parents didn't just watch their children giggle at the Mike's antics, they watched them absorb a primal truth. Even the smallest creatures could outmaneuver predators. Meanwhile, in Chinese villages, the Monkey King's chaos wasn't confined to ancient scripture. Puppeteers adapted Journey to the West for toddler audiences, turning Sun Wukong's heavenly revolt into a slapstick masterclass. His staff wasn't just a weapon, it was a teacher's pointer demonstrating how to trip up arrogant officials with their own rules. When the monkey god stuffed stolen peaches into his cheeks, kids roared, but they also internalized the subtext. Authorities' treasures weren't sacred, just poorly guarded. These performances weaponized childhood wonder, turning naptime fables into blueprints for defiance. The pedagogy was deliberate. Burmese troops used rhyming couplets where the final syllables matched local resistance slogans, ensuring lyrics stuck in young minds like nursery rhymes. Chinese puppeteers crafted monkey puppets with detachable tails. When a child played with them, they learned that even captured rebels could escape with the right twist. And in Java, the clown god Sema's riddles taught double meanings before kids could spell. Why does the firefly glow? He'd ask, then wink, because some lights are too clever to be caught in jars. What made this indoctrination so potent was its invisibility. British inspectors saw Burmese children playing with cat and mouse toys, not practicing evasion tactics. King officials dismissed monkey tales as harmless fantasy, missing how the puppets' exaggerated bows mirrored their own hollow ceremonies. The lessons bypassed adult censorship by speaking directly to the least suspecting demographic, kids who'd grow up humming revolutionary allegories alongside alphabet songs. The real magic, these stories self-replicated. A Burmese grandmother might forget the official ending to the mouse fable, improvising one where the cat falls into its own trap. Chinese siblings acted out Monkey King scenes where heaven's gates collapsed under the weight of its bureaucracy. The puppets didn't just teach resistance, they became heirlooms of insurrection, passed down like toy swords sharpened with each retelling. By the time colonial powers realized why entire generations smirked at certain folktales, the shadows had already grown teeth in the dark. The puppeteer's toolkit was never just for storytelling. It was an arsenal of innovation disguised as tradition. In the dim backrooms of Qing Dynasty theaters, troops perfected oiled paper screens that did more than cast shadows, they sharpened satire to surgical precision. By stretching translucent paper thinner than rice parchment and treating it with tung oil, they created surfaces so crisp, a puppet's raised eyebrow could telegraph contempt across a crowded square. Where rough hemp screens once blurred dissent into ambiguity, these polished screens etched every subversive detail into the light. A corrupt official's puppet might glisten with exaggerated sweat beads under the lamp's heat, while heroes' profiles stayed cool and clean visual shorthand even illiterate farmers understood. But the real engineering marvels hid in plain sight. Puppet cases with false bottoms became smuggling routes for rebel manifestos, their compartments triggered by pressing a carved lotus petal just so. In Sichuan, troops embedded small mirrors into the frames of nobleman puppets, not for decoration, but to flash sunlight in coded patterns to look out scouts during outdoor performances. A flicker to the left might warn of approaching guards. 3 quick reflections could signal a safe house's location. The tools of art became tools of insurgency, each innovation birthed from necessity's ruthless creativity. Even the humble puppet rod concealed revolutionary potential. Cantonese puppeteers hollowed out bamboo control sticks to hide folded protest poems, their ends sealed with wax that melted under a performer's nervous grip. Javanese masters crafted articulated serpent puppets whose rattling tails could mimic the cadence of underground resistance songs when shaken at precise intervals. The most audacious trick, puppet lamps fueled not by oil, but by smuggled gunpowder, their wicks adjusted to create controlled bursts that masked the sound of nearby rebel explosions during chaotic festival nights. What made these adaptations so brilliant was their dual purpose. A mirror meant to adjust stage lighting could become a signaling device in seconds. A puppet's elaborately stitched robe might unfold into a map of secret mountain passes. Authorities inspecting these items saw only the artistry, never the mechanisms humming beneath the surface. Like the puppetry itself, the technology thrived in the gap between perception and reality. When Manchurian officials confiscated a troop's equipment in 1789, they proudly displayed the harmless folk artifacts in a Beijing museum, unaware the puppet head's hollow eyes still held rolled messages waiting to be retrieved. The ultimate testament to this ingenuity, how seamlessly it scaled. A single oiled screen could amplify critique to thousands. A handful of mirrored puppets could coordinate regional uprisings. And when colonial crackdowns made wooden cases too risky, Sumatran puppeteers switched to folding leather screens stitched with rebel symbols performance spaces that collapsed into innocent-looking satchels at a moment's notice. The tools evolved, but the truth remained. In the right hands, even a drop of oil or a sliver of glass could become a spark in the dark. From the silk screens of Java to the moonlit courtyards of Mali, oppressed communities have always found ways to turn performance into protest. While Asian shadow puppetry carved dissent into leather and lamplight, West African griots wielded oral poetry like a surgeon's scalpel. Their praise songs for kings laced with subtle barbs only the people could decipher. A griot might sing of a lion's generosity while describing how it left scraps for hyenas, the metaphor glowing hotter than embers under his honeyed tone. Like shadow puppeteers, these storytellers mastered the art of plausible deniability, wrapping critique in proverbs so elegant, even the targets of their satire would applaud. Europe's Punch and Judy shows may seem like crude slapstick by comparison, but their chaotic violence hid similarly sharp teeth. Behind the bright colors and exaggerated squeals, these street performances mocked aristocracy with every smack of Punch's stick. When Judy scolded her husband for laziness, London's working-class crowds heard echoes of their own struggles with factory foremen. The puppet's grotesque features, Punch's hooked nose, Judy's permanent scowl, mirrored the exaggerated caricatures Asian puppeteers used to skewer corrupt officials. What made these traditions kin wasn't their aesthetics, but their shared DNA of resistance. Whether through Balinese shadows or Gambian melodies, oppressed people worldwide have whispered truth to power using the same weapon, the assumption that art is harmless. The real magic lies in how these traditions cross-pollinated. Along the Swahili coast, Arab-influenced shadow plays blended with griot storytelling, creating performances where leather puppets sang political parables in rhythmic verse. Dutch colonists brought Punch and Judy to Indonesia, unaware that local puppeteers would adapt the clown's violent antics to mock colonial brutality. A Javanese version featured a bumbling Dutch soldier puppet whose wooden rifle kept misfiring, a joke that slayed audiences while sailing over the heads of occupying officers. What unites these traditions is their faith in the audience's collective imagination. A griot's raised eyebrow, a Punch puppet's exaggerated bow, or a Chinese shadow figure's deliberate stumble, each relied on crowds reading between the lines. This silent collusion between performer and spectator created something no censor could confiscate, a moment of shared recognition, fleeting as a shadow yet enduring as memory. When a Malay shadow master twisted his demon puppet's arm just so, and a griot in Senegal paused mid-verse to let listeners fill in the blanks, they were speaking the same language, one written not in ink or leather, but in the unspoken spaces where oppression meets ingenuity. Perhaps the most telling parallel is how these art forms were simultaneously cherished and feared by those in power. French colonizers collected griot songs as folk curiosities, while executing poets whose lyrics sparked uprisings. British aristocrats chuckled at Punch's wife beating antics until the puppet began parodying Prince Regent George's gluttony. Like Asian rulers who alternately patronized and persecuted shadow troops, they wavered between appreciating the art and dreading its influence. Their inconsistency betrayed a truth they couldn't admit, that puppets and poets are only as dangerous as the injustices they expose. Today, this legacy lives on wherever artists cloak dissent in creativity. A viral TikTok dance mimicking police brutality arrests owes as much to Javanese shadow subversion as it does to griot wordplay. When protesters in Hong Kong waved umbrella movement puppets resembling government officials, they tapped into the same ancient strategy Malay puppeteers used against sultans. The mediums change, leather gives way to pixels, oral epics to memes, but the core truth remains. Oppression breeds ingenuity, and laughter in the dark can be revolutionary. After all, a dictator might break a screen or silence a singer, but try catching a shadow or stopping a story mid-breath. Modern puppeteers no longer whisper behind silk screens, they broadcast through fiber optic cables and LED projections, proving that shadows still terrify tyrants in the 21st century. In Taipei's underground theaters, troupes like Shinehouse Theater stage razor-sharp political satires where dragon puppets don red stars, their elongated claws snatching at island-shaped treasures. The symbolism couldn't be clearer, yet Beijing's censors face an impossible dilemma. Banning traditional puppetry risks inflaming cultural tensions, while allowing it means tolerating dissent disguised as heritage. Taiwanese artists exploit this contradiction mercilessly, updating centuries-old tales with modern twists, like a scene where the Monkey King hacks through a great firewall of paper demons, each bearing the likeness of Chinese social media apps. Meanwhile, Myanmar's resistance has turned Zoom into a digital puppet stage. With junta soldiers monitoring physical gatherings, activists adapted by streaming Nang Yai performances where leather crocodiles devour military green uniforms. The real innovation, using virtual backgrounds to mask performers' locations, while chat functions let audiences suggest plot twists in real time, crowdsourcing rebellion through emoji and coded comments. A single performance might bounce through 20 virtual hosts across 3 time zones, leaving authorities chasing shadows across servers. Even materials have gone subversive. Indonesian collective Wayang replaces traditional buffalo hide with recycled election posters, carving new puppets from the shredded promises of corrupt politicians. Each flickering silhouette bears the faint traces of campaign slogans, a ghostly reminder of broken pledges. In Hong Kong, protesters during the 2019 demonstrations projected shadow animations of the Lennon Wall messages onto buildings, transforming concrete into temporary resistance screens. The old tricks still work, they've just upgraded their toolkit. When Malaysian authorities banned a play about a greedy badger king, the troupe released it as a TikTok filter where users' selfie cameras transformed them into the critter, sparking a viral wave of anti-government memes. Cambodian artists circumvent Facebook censorship by live-streaming Espionage performances with allegorical titles like The Crocodile's New Teeth, their Khmer wordplay lost on algorithm monitors but crystal clear to locals. What terrifies modern autocrats isn't the puppets, it's their viral afterlife. A Burmese shadow play mocking junta leaders as bumbling ogres might get deleted from YouTube by dawn, but not before getting remixed into protest chants, graffiti stencils, and even tattoos. Taiwanese troops deliberately design performances to spawn screenshot-worthy moments, knowing a single image of their puppet emperor clutching Taiwan like a stolen jewel will outpace any censor's reach. The screens got bigger, the shadows sharper, but the game remains the same. Ridicule the mighty until their power becomes farce, one shared clip at a time. Lost plays whisper through history like fragments of burned parchment, their stories torn apart, yet still glowing with defiant embers. Consider Java's Bima Susai, a shadow epic where the Pandawa warrior Bima doesn't just defeat demons, but drowns them in a river of Dutch-looking invaders. Colonial censors banned it in 1895, yet villagers preserved the climax through pantomime. Elders would accidentally spill water during harvest dances, their splashes mimicking the play's revolutionary flood. The Dutch confiscated puppets, but missed the oral backups, grandmothers humming Bima's victory chant while grinding rice, the rhythm syncing with pestle strikes like a metronome of resistance. Fujian's Zheng Chenggong's revenge met a harsher fate. King officials burned every script they found, terrified of a play where the Ming loyalist Zheng, a real-life pirate king, beheaded a Manchu general with a prop sword that, coincidentally, resembled the emperor's ceremonial blade. But the story refused to die. Fishermen along the Minjiang River adapted it into coded work songs, their nets rising and falling like Zheng's phantom fleet. Even the puppets evolved. Artists carved Zheng's face with a deliberately misplaced mole, matching a fugitive rebel leader's birthmark. Authorities saw superstition, dissidents saw a beacon. The tragedy of these lost plays isn't just their destruction, it's how close we came to forgetting them entirely. Burmese Yamazato scripts were boiled into glue by British soldiers, their Buddhist Hell King allegories melting into sludge. Yet a monk in Mandalay saved one scene by tattooing it onto his ribs, Yama's shadow pointing at colonizers' sins, the ink fading with each year but the message deepening. Similarly, Thai Nang Talung masters buried outlawed puppets in rice fields, their leather dissolving into fertilizer only for the next generation's crops to sprout with suspiciously familiar silhouettes against the sunset. What makes these fragments so haunting is their unfinished rebellion. A single surviving line from Bima Susai, "The river drinks tyrants whole," inspired 20th century independence rallies. A charred scrap of Zheng Chenggong depicting a shattered crown fueled anti-king secret societies. These weren't just stories, they were blueprints waiting to be reassembled. Like the Javanese puppeteer who staged Bima Susai's finale with finger shadows after his tools were seized, proving tyranny could break the props but never the hands that cast them. The real lesson: censorship misjudges how stories multiply when fractured. Burn a script and it becomes ash carried by wind, landing in places power can't reach. Silence a puppeteer and their shadows grow louder in memory, because the most dangerous stories aren't the ones written down, but the ones that rewrite themselves in the spaces between oppression and imagination. Your screen is the new silk screen, and every meme you share carries echoes of those ancient leather silhouettes. Think about the last viral political cartoon you scrolled past, the one where a world leader's face was subtly morphed into a squawking chicken, or the meme comparing tax policies to a rigged carnival game. That's not just internet humor, it's shadow puppetry for the digital age. The same principles apply. Exaggerate the villain's features just enough to reveal their flaws, wrap the message in plausible deniability, and let the audience's laughter do the rest. When a Taiwanese animator disguises a critique of censorship as a cute cat video, or a Russian activist posts a recipe for protest signs using ingredients that spell out "no war," they're using the puppeteer's oldest trick, hiding the blade inside the bouquet. You don't need a lamp and leather to join this tradition. Ever shared a gif of a politician's awkward stumble with a sarcastic caption? That's you carving silhouettes of dissent. Laughed at a satirical news headline so outrageous it circled back to truth? Congratulations, you've just decoded modern shadow play. Even corporate mascots get weaponized. Remember when fast food chickens and laundry detergent brands suddenly became symbols of resistance in Hong Kong protests? The tools have changed, but the game hasn't. Power still fears ridicule more than rifles, and the internet has given everyone a knife to sharpen. The real magic happens in the collective wink between creator and audience. A Belarusian Telegram channel posts a parody weather forecast showing heavy showers of resignation letters. Our followers know it's really about the wave of officials defecting. A Filipino comic artist draws a superhero whose invisibility cloak mirrors the president's dodged accountability. Like villagers centuries ago who caught the subtext when a puppet tax collector's nose grew 3 inches mid-scene, today's audiences are fluent in this visual shorthand. The difference: now the puppeteers are wearing hoodies instead of hanfu, and the shadows travel at the speed of Wi-Fi. So next time you favorite a protest doodle or forward a satirical edit, remember, you're not just scrolling. You're keeping alive a tradition that outlived dynasties, colonizers, and censors. Those ancient puppeteers risked prison to make tyrants look foolish. Today's artists risk algorithms. But the goal remains the same: to make oppression ridiculous, one shared image at a time. Because laughter in the dark isn't just catharsis, it's the sound of shadows stitching a new script with or without permission. From silk screens to smartphone screens, the dance of shadows and power continues, unbroken across centuries, unshaken by empires or algorithms. Those leather silhouettes that once flickered in Ming Dynasty tea houses now pulse in TikTok animations and protest projections, proving that the quietest forms of dissent often outlast the loudest decrees. Consider the anonymous artist in Moscow who turned a subway ad into a shadow play by backlighting Putin's face with their phone, morphing his portrait into a growling bear mid-commute. Or the Hong Kong students who encoded protest routes in augmented reality filters, their digital puppets pointing the way when physical signs were banned. The tools evolve, but the instinct remains. Creativity will always find cracks in the walls of control. What makes this legacy so extraordinary isn't just its resilience, it's its universality. From Balinese dalangs to Belarusian meme makers, those who wield shadows share a common creed. Truth wrapped in delight slips past gatekeepers faster than fury. A Javanese proverb says, "The puppet's knife is velvet, but the wound it leaves never heals." That velvet edge lives on in every satirical cartoon that makes a dictator flinch, every viral skit that reduces corruption to absurdity. The rulers who burned puppet chests and the regimes that ban VPNs are chasing the same ghost, the one that laughs as it vanishes into the crowd. So as the screen fades, don't just close this chapter. Carry its lesson into your scroll, your share, your glance at the world stage. That meme comparing politicians to squabbling geese, that Sema the clown reborn in pixels. The street artist's stencil of a leader as a limp balloon, that's Karagöz's tattered shadow dancing on concrete. The stories never really end, they just change skins. Because oppression thrives in silence but resistance, it prefers the rustle of leather, the tap of a keyboard, the collective gasp when light finally catches what power hoped would stay hidden. The puppeteers of old knew their greatest weapon was patience, waiting for the angle that turns a harmless silhouette into a revelation. Now it's your turn to hold the lamp.